Recording in progress.
Once more the fields have ripened to harvest and the fruitful earth has fulfilled the promise of spring, wrote Percival Chubb. The work of those who labor has been rewarded. They have sown and reaped, planted and gathered. How rich and beautiful is the bounty gathered, the golden grain and clustered corn, the grapes of purple and green, the crimson apples and yellow pears, and all the colors of orchard and garden, vineyard and field. Chubb, who was a leader in the American Ethical Union, ethical culture, who had been a founder of the Fabian Society in England before emigrating to the United States as an educator. Chubb went on to suggest that from this harvest that we see about us every year at this time, the laden fields and the abundance that comes to us, we should have occasion to think about the harvest of heart and mind, resolving to be better stewards of all of life's gifts. He suggested that we needed a harvest of reverence in recognition of the power that sustains us, whatever name we may attach to that power, however theological or scientific that name may be. And he suggested that we needed a harvest of gratitude that was best expressed by our committing our hands and hearts to the well-being of the world. Now, it's my experience that most people in our rather prosperous society have much more than they realize or can even imagine. This is true when it comes to material things, and it is especially true about the things that matter most, which aren't really things at all, but life's intangible blessings. The very things we're most likely to take for granted and forget about when we take stock of our lives. The relationships, the love between people, the care that we can each offer one to another. These are far more valuable than the things we accumulate once our basic needs have been met. No matter how much we already have, we seem to long for more, and this longing can obscure us from the abundance we may already possess. And so we too often focus on what is lacking in our lives rather than what is overflowing, leading us to a sense of scarcity rather than an awareness and appreciation of our abundance. To be sure, there is still considerable poverty in our otherwise affluent society, troubling hardship for some alongside the comfort and ease of others, disturbing inequities in how our overall abundance is shared. And even the most privileged can feel the pinch of a downturn in their circumstances, even if others might think them melodramatic in their expressions of angst, while nurturing the desire to tell them to just get over it. It may be that scarcity and abundance are relative categories rather than absolute ones, but I need to say that day by day, I am astonished by life's richness, even in the most barren places. And I have felt richly blessed by the abundance of the earth and well-being of the society that I was fortunate to have been born into, even as I recognize that for many, this good fortune never arrives. And no matter how much Unitarian Universalists may perceive themselves to be just plain folks, everyday souls, most of us have been fortunate to find a comfortable link in the world's metaphorical food chain. whether we're talking about material prosperity or the riches of, dare I say it, the Spirit. It's entirely possible that the economic anxiety of our times, which never seems to abate, no matter how well the stock market is doing or what the jobs report says, not to mention the relentless inflation in prices from food to housing. This has, no matter what it may have you longing to receive the news that someone, somewhere, perhaps a dimly remembered relative or some perfect stranger for whom you once did a good deed, like in a fairy tale, well, that they have left you a small fortune in the form of an unexpected inheritance. It's somewhere deep in the fantasy life of most of us to expect or hunger for such an inheritance. Perhaps you've begun opening those annoying emails or text messages about bequests or lottery winnings, hopeful that just one of them might actually be the real thing. Or perhaps you've started returning the reply forms that come with your all too frequent mailings from Publishers Clearinghouse. I was surprised to learn just this week that it's still around when I overheard Cindy tell a telephone solicitor that she doesn't read in order to get them off the phone. But we may return those coupons, hoping that Ed McMahon's successor, whoever it is, will appear at our door with one of those oversized checks and a camera crew. Let's face it, even the most privileged among us have been a little anxious about finances lately, if not for ourselves, then for our loved ones and our neighbors. But I'm not here to encourage the illusion that you might someday soon fall into an unexpected financial inheritance. And I'm not really wanting to talk about money or material prosperity at all. But I do want to help you recognize your abundance and encourage you to spend your inheritance, even though you may be utterly unaware that you've received one. Briefly stated, I wish to remind you that the inheritances which matter most are rarely financial at all, but rather legacies of the Spirit, which move us to lead more satisfying and fulfilling lives. And a legacy of the Spirit can never fully be realized by saving it up or somehow keeping it to ourselves. A legacy of the Spirit is valuable only when we spend it. Do you remember the children's ditty? Love is something if we give it away. It's true. And it's as true for adults as it is for children. In his book, Who Needs God?, Rabbi Harold Kushner explained how, throughout his rabbinic career, he urged his congregants to recall their religious tradition and make greater room for it in their lives, so that they might feel happier and more fulfilled. Now, that's a selling point that Kushner could offer that many religious communities can't. Because the truth is that much of what passes for spiritual insight often leads us unhappy, unfulfilled, and perhaps even scared about our well-being. But that wasn't Harold Kushner's style of spiritual living. Kushner wrote, "I have told them the Hasidic story of the person who got a telegram telling them that a relative had died and left them some valuable property. The person was to contact the rabbi for details. Excited, they went to the rabbi only to be told that the relative was Moses and the valuable property was the Jewish religious tradition. Disappointment inevitably ensued. And much of the time, Kushner said, they reacted as I suspect the person in the story did, disappointed that their legacy was religious wisdom and not downtown real estate. In that same spirit, I have a voicemail for you this morning. You have spiritual kin who have died and left you a valuable inheritance. And just as some investments seem to decline in value almost as often as they increase, the value of this inheritance will erode unless you immediately claim it, trust its value, and reinvest some of it. And then wisely, I say, spend the rest, recklessly if you have to. The arrival of this inheritance couldn't be more timely. You see, no matter how well the capital markets on Wall Street and Bay Street have been doing in recent years, social capital has been eroding in North American society for more than a generation. And our capital reserves at the present time are at an all-time low in many places. You've heard me talk about social capital before. If physical capital refers to the physical objects that we can buy and sell and own, such as the property we might hold or other tangible assets, social capital refers to the connections among us, the connections between me and you and you and you and you, and then the connection of this vibrant religious community to the larger world, to North Point, Douglas, where we now have a relationship and ought to do everything we can to cultivate it and nurture it along. Or to the Bear Clan, which this congregation has supported in the past. To our First Nations neighbors, to those in need, to the synagogue across the street that we loan our parking lot to for high holy days, gladly letting other people park in our space because we don't always need it for our own vehicles. That's social capital, the relationships between individuals and communities, and it is far more valuable than anything you can buy on the Toronto Stock Exchange. Sadly, the free world has been spending its social capital frivolously for more than half a century now. When it comes to social capital, it's almost as if we have sold the family silver and gambled away what we got for it. We have spent our cherished store of social capital for brief moments of immediate gratification before retreating to the privacy of our homes, which increasingly serve as bulwarks against the world rather than as entry gates to it. If we fail to stem this erosion of social capital, we will soon find ourselves socially bankrupt, living in a society, if you can call it that, where social connectedness will have been so diminished that people we once trusted will be suspect, and social interaction will be limited to sitting in front of our televisions or computers, where we may log into something erroneously called social media in order to engage in some of the most antisocial behaviors imaginable. When I look south across the border, I'm frightened. I'm frightened at the polarization and the dramatic decline in social capital. But I know that Canadians are not as far behind as we like to imagine. So we need to start spending our social capital in order to build a new investment in it. Interestingly enough, in the lives of most congregations, it has been women's societies that have been largely responsible for religious communities building social capital among themselves and in the wider community. The same is actually true in the secular world, where it is often women's organizations that make the space and provide the time and the energy which hold the vision of a world ordered a little differently, a world in which relationships matter more than material wealth. I think all of us need to reclaim that imagination, that vision, and that dogged determination that the Women's Society in this congregation exerted over many decades, which served to build relationships among us and build relationships with the larger community. Last week, while I was researching something seemingly unrelated to this morning's topic, I discovered that between 2011 and 2021, the percentage of Manitobans reporting to Statistics Canada that they had no religion or secular perspectives rose from 26.5% to 36.7%. Let me state that number again. It rose from 26.5% to 36.7%. That's a Nielsen rating on the church, not just ours, but every religious community in this province. On the one hand, this trend is hardly surprising. We've been seeing it happen, even if we didn't recognize its magnitude. But on the other hand, it's not necessarily a problem in and of itself. If people find the spiritual care that they need in a reading society, or at the library, or in a local community club, or some other place, that's fine. But traditionally, historically, religious communities, congregations had a significant role in bringing people together and building social capital, building relationships among them. To the extent that some people may be leaving behind archaic religious ideas, this could even be seen as a positive development. But what are they doing for community? And why is it that as one of the most friendly religious institutions in this city to those who have come to mistrust or ignore religious community, how is it that we haven't created the place for such people to come so that they might answer Statistics Canada's surveys a little differently? The problem, as I see it, is that people are simultaneously leaving behind opportunities for connection and community while leaving behind religious beliefs that no longer serve them. When social relationships outside of the home and workplace become fewer, the health of society suffers. I think the lack of robust social relationships is one of the key factors in that toxic political landscape that has emerged and which has been bleeding into this country. A little more than half a century ago, the American jurist Learned Hand said that community is already in the process of dissolution, where each person begins to eye their neighbor as a possible enemy, where nonconformity with the accepted creed, political as well as religious, is a mark of disaffection, where denunciation without specification or backing takes the place of evidence, where orthodoxy chokes freedom of dissent, where faith in the eventual supremacy of reason has become so timid that we dare not enter our convictions in the open lists to win or lose. A friend of mine once suggested to me that Unitarian Universalists should focus their intention entirely upon the future, expending our energies to create the church that is to be rather than recalling the church that once was. How about the church that could be today instead of imagining that anything good we might achieve is somewhere in a distant future. I agree that we should have a forward orientation. Any strategy that ignores our rich spiritual heritage, the wisdom we have to draw on from our past, is fraught with danger and astonishingly naive. It will also tend to obscure the abundance with which we have to work. It would be akin to buying on a credit card when we already have a rich inheritance in the bank, begging to be invested in the future that awaits us, though our expenditures of the Spirit in the present moment are wanting. No church, no individual, no community of people can remain fully alive merely by conserving its resources. The only real way to save for the future, indeed to save the future, is to spend our inheritance, to recognize our abundance and invest it where it matters most. We need to expand our material resources while they can still while they can still produce desirable results. We need to spend our religious inheritance for the good of the larger community. We need to spend ourselves in service and in hospitality to newcomers, so that our unique and life-giving tradition might be reseeded for the generations to come. We owe the world more than money, wrote Charles St. John, one of the leading Unitarian ministers of a century ago. We owe it inspiration, good example, and the constant help of good qualities in ourselves, and may not honorably be forever struggling with debt in the matter. Despite possessing an abundance of what truly matters, we often stumble through life as if we were deep in debt. Yet our liberal and liberating tradition is overflowing with abundance when it comes to inspiration, good example, and the good qualities of people. We need to acknowledge this abundance and spread it around. And individually, we each need to bring our fair share to the common table, so that together we can accomplish the grand purposes that no individual can achieve alone, no matter how capable and industrious and clever they may be. Overall, Unitarian Universalists already live with abundance, but we seem slow to acknowledge it and recognize that our relative prosperity has moral consequences. Collectively, we are, in fact, privileged almost to the point of embarrassment. For the most part, we do enjoy an embarrassment of riches. What may be lacking at times is an adequate sense of gratitude to the past and obligation to the future that's expressed in the present moment. The culture of abundance is where gratitude and obligation meet. We even have a name for it. It's called Thanksgiving. Forget all the stories you've heard about what Thanksgiving means. It is the meeting place of gratitude and obligation. In the end, our demonstrable abundance will blossom into a culture of abundance when we respond to life's grace and good fortune in reckless thanksgiving. The closing hymn is number 1014. Please be aware that we sing a different refrain here. We sing answering the call of love. Some of your hymn books may be marked. The screen should be correct, but whether looking at the page in front of you or the page there, let's all sing together, answering the call of love.